English translation, 543rd contact. Saturday, the 4th of August, 2012, 15:03 hours.
Here I am. After the correction work, I had to discuss a few things with Bernadett and then also some work problems with Silvano. So I am 3 minutes late.
Which is no problem, dear friend.
Then I would like to know what you think about Brigitte's article about the devil woman Mother Teresa, which I prepared for you here in the office so that you could read it before our correction work.
Mother Teresa, or religious madness in all its cruelty.
Countless books have been written about Mother Teresa. She was praised to the skies, showered with prizes, venerated as a saint, and, thanks to a miracle conjured up in a flash, beatified shortly after her death. On 26th of June 2012 at 2015 hours, a film by Michael Busse and Maria Rosa Bobby was broadcast on Bayern Alpha with the title, The Difficult Legacy of Mother Teresa. The program was critical, albeit in a mild form, and it prompted me to investigate further to find other questioning voices about this dominant woman. It was not easy, because in the flood of praise, these voices are literally drowned out. I would like to give a few of these critical book authors, filmmakers, and those directly affected a chance to have their say here. Their texts can be read on the internet or looked up in the film documentaries. All sources are listed at the end of the article. Here are a few short flashes of individual contributions.
One of Arunabh Chatterjee's accusations is that Calcutta has become a worldwide symbol of misery because Mother Teresa needed this backdrop for her career, for her fame, and for the donations she received. Calcutta is seen as a city full of sewers and gutters, populated by beggars, homeless and lepers, people without limbs in a city without streets. In Western eyes, there is only one good thing, namely Mother Teresa and her religious sisters, who occasionally row through this misery and pick up the poor. Unfortunately, this is a firmly entrenched but unfortunately false image in the minds of the world public. I think she had very good intentions at first with a very simple offer, but then she built up the hospice for the dying into the finest hospital in the world. Today I would call it a hospice at best. And when I visited it and she was still alive, many people in Calcutta would not even have their pets there. Suffering and enduring pain was prescribed to everyone, not just Catholics, in this hospice. At first, there were also many doctors among the volunteers. They were the first to express sharp criticism in professional journals, lack of hygiene, no medical care, criminal dilettantism in the work of the volunteers. Mother Teresa replied, "We are misunderstood. We are misinterpreted. We are not nurses. We are not doctors. We are not social workers. We are religious." She had no clean beds for her patients, only small, narrow couches. The patients were not allowed to walk up and down the corridors. They were supposed to stay lying down. They were not given name tags, only numbers, and they were not allowed to receive visits. Arunabh Chatterjee, doctor, born and raised in Calcutta. When we enter the home for the dying in Kalighat, in the south of Calcutta, the metropolis of poverty, it is just morning cleaning. The patients pour their urine on the floor. The cleaning is done with cold water by spraying the floors with hoses. For this purpose, the platforms, which are on rollers, are pushed around by the volunteers using 2 poles. Whether the people have contagious diseases is not known. They have no names, only numbers. Their hair was shaved off when they entered. God decides who lives and who dies. With these words, Mother Teresa had always refused real medical care in her homes. Michael Busse and Maria Rosa Bobby, filmmaker. There were 4 flannels for 40 patients. I only realized later that it is part of the idea that there are very few things. So the laundry of the human beings who were ill was washed in cold water. To wash the dishes, we all squatted on the floor like the Amish people and washed the tin dishes in troughs of cold water. We were not told who had what. One of the patients I cared for was HIV positive. I only found out after 4 weeks. She was also washed and fed normally. There were also sick people who wanted to hang pictures of saints on the wall, which were removed immediately, and it was a Catholic house. Little by little, you question these things. Why do they have to cut their hair? Why are the hygienic conditions as they are? Why are the sick at the mercy of the sensation-hungry visitors and also trainees in the mold? Why is it necessary to cut their hair? Else Buschauer, journalist and volunteer for 2 months, part of the film contribution by Buzz Bobby.
No. But all these accusations, we would have liked to talk to the sisters and the successor of Mother Teresa, but they refused. We had to sign a paper saying no interviews with the sisters, no interviews with the patients, no interviews with the volunteers inside the hospice. Shooting not longer than half an hour. So we only had the views of the human beings we were not allowed to talk to. Reporter. To this day, the criticism of Mother Teresa's work is hardly known. The Aura of the City of Joy, the title of a book about Mother Teresa and her work, with her dying home overlays everything. Perhaps it is also because hardly any volunteers know what the patients are thinking, because they do not speak their language. Somehow we imagine the City of Joy in a different way. Throughout her life, Mother Teresa never tired of denouncing loneliness as the torment of Western civilization. But the human beings here do not seem to be better off. The story is so incredible that the reportage team of the above-mentioned film hired a translator from the Goethe Institute who speaks Hindi and Bengali to be able to talk to the people. Translator. They kept trying to get help from the sisters, but they sent them away. Impressive stories of affected family members follow. Then for the first time we see a seriously ill woman lying on the ground here in this slum, 100 meters from the entrance of Mother Teresa's home. People tell, complimenting each other, she is sick, but the sisters do not come here. When the human beings who live here put one of their own who is so ill right in front of the gate, the sisters do not take him in. And then we hear the same story again. That translates. At night, the sisters' family members come here, and they take as many things as they can carry. Rice, clothes, medicines. The claim and reality of charity. Michael Buss and Maria Rosa Bobby.
A video taken by Dr. Ariwap Chatterjee 1 year before Mother Teresa's death. In the immediate vicinity of the home, he did research and talked to people who very often saw the sisters unloading relief supplies, donations and medicines from all over the world for the poor. A woman describes her observations. Again and again, she had asked the sisters for help and was always turned away. She said that the sisters keep the donations themselves. I was very surprised. I did not know that such a thing happened, and I asked, "Is this really serious?" One man confirmed this. "Don't you know that they sell the donations to the shops in the area and give them to their family members, and not to the slum dwellers?" The video shows a woman who sought refuge in the Mother Teresa orphanage. Her husband had beaten her. She and her 2 children had knocked on the door at 10 hours in the evening. The sisters had allowed her to spend the night in the courtyard with her children, but at 5 hours in the morning, they threw all 3 out. Without food and drink, the sisters heard the complaints and simply walked over the children. I was very surprised that they didn't even give the children something to eat, a biscuit, some milk, nothing, and that in these conditions. As things went on, a mother with her sick child sat right outside the door. She says that the nurses offered to take the sick child away from her, but only if the mother would let her go. She refused because she loved her child and wanted to keep it. Here, the Indians can learn to understand the suffering of Christ. That is why there is hardly any medical care here. I remember a woman with cancer who was in extreme pain, and I told her, this is the kiss of Jesus, a sign that you are so close to Jesus on the cross that he can kiss you. And then she told me, tell Jesus to stop kissing me. Mother Teresa laughed. Dr. Chatterjee says, I think you don't have to be a doctor to know that it is cruel to tell people something like that. Firstly, most people are not Christians, and secondly, the human beings in India suffer nonstop. They suffer from birth, and at the end of their lives, perhaps they could be given some peace, instead of being further hurt by being told that suffering brings them closer to Christ, whom most people do not even know. I think this is merciless and cruel. Dr. Aruap Chatterjee.
Recently, it has become known that Mother Teresa fought for her faith at an early age. In a letter to Jesus, she wrote already in 1959, "In my soul I feel that God does not want me, that God does not really exist. If there is no God, there can also be no soul." Nevertheless, it was her wish and ambition to become a saint. Isn't that cheating on people? Every time I wanted to tell the truth, that I have no faith, the words just do not come. My mouth stays closed. Michael Busser and Maria Rosa Bobby.
A religious fundamentalist, a demagogue, an obscurantist, and a servant of secular power. Christopher Hitchens.
In the report, which are partly based on statements by former members of the nuns community, reveal the immense contempt for humanity with which the missionaries of charity approach the poor. Interestingly, the order does not disclose its finances, although Indian law requires it to do so for aid organizations. In other countries, too, the data remain under wraps, including Germany. According to estimates, however, annual revenues amount to a three-digit million euro sum. The administration is largely free of charge, being handled by the 4,000 sisters and the 300,000 volunteers. This seems at first to indicate that the donations arrive directly at the needy without much frictional loss. But figures from Great Britain 1991 show that the equivalent of DM 5.3 million in income is offset by tiny DM 360,000 in expenditure. What happens to the remaining millions? Based on the information now known, it can be taken as certain that the money will not be transferred from the rich countries to the poor. As soon as a station of the closest loving missionaries is established in a country, it has to provide for its financing itself. Former nuns and staff members also report that donations in kind are hoarded, and money is also not transferred to emergency areas, even if the donors have explicitly stated the intended purpose. Most of the money ends up in Rome, in an account at the Vatican Bank. Whatever happens to it there, it does not benefit the world's poor. Mother Teresa's financial behavior has systematically prevented aid from being given, as it has prevented the establishment of an efficient organizational structure. The sisters are neither trained nor educated. Many of the aid agencies do not work professionally, and the founder of the order was obviously still proud of this situation. This cynical attitude not only leads to the fact that donations are not used for the intended purpose. Witnesses also describe inhuman conditions that are said to prevail in the missionary stations. Tuberculosis sufferers are not isolated, syringes are not properly disinfected, and painkillers are not administered as a matter of principle. The British newspaper Guardian saw the hospices for the dying as only an organised form of failure to provide assistance. As if that were not enough, accusations have also surfaced that the order is involved in child trafficking activities. The mediator in the FRG is the Association Pro Infante, which is heavily criticized by a number of adoption experts for its practices. The motivation of the missionaries as well as their German helpers is probably primarily idealistic, to turn poor heathen children into good Christians. The fact that nuns give themselves up to even manipulate documents only seems surprising at first glance. If the stories of missionaries who left the mission are true, the young women are exposed to great psychological pressure from the very beginning, which is known from sects and other psycho groups and aims at dissolving the nun's identity. This includes a tightly regulated daily routine, sleep deprivation, censorship of reading, and frequent transfers so that no windows are opened to the outside world and no ties can be forged. It is well known that ethical standards can slip with such conditioned people, and that a supposed service for an alleged figu note, God can outweigh worldly law and the interests of human beings. The Nobel Peace Prize winner had no interest in the human beings in changing their social situation. For the angel of the poor knew one thing only too well: only if there were still poor, many poor, would she also continue to be their angel. Gunnar Schiedel.
Dr. Dianka Chakraborty, a scientist at Jadavpur University, is an expert on a problem that has become one of Calcutta's new plagues: arsenic keratosis, a skin disease often associated with skin cancer caused by poisoned groundwater. He estimates that the contaminated area covers some 40,000 square kilometres and that 2 million human beings are exposed to the poison, with 200,000 manifesting signs of the disease, which has so far been largely ignored by the authorities since 1996. This is the price we pay for population growth, he says. Either we start to drastically reduce the birth rate, or this whole area will be a desert in 2025. That is why Mother Teresa's position on abortion is so absurd. Dr. Dianka Chakraborty.
To make the beatification of Teresa official, a posthumous miracle was needed. This was quickly found in the small town of Dangram, in the form of the poor Indian woman Monica Besra. 1 year after the death of the mother of the order, the woman with abdominal pain had turned to the sisters. A medallion of the good nun solved her problem in no time. A tumor in her abdomen was miraculously healed. For months, the husband protested against this version of the story. My wife was healed by the doctors and not by a miracle. In fact, Besra had been in hospital before. This miracle claim is absolute nonsense and should be condemned by everyone, says also the Dr. Ranjan Kumar Mustafi, who treated Besra. She had a medium-sized growth in her abdomen caused by tuberculosis. The medicine she was given reduced the cystic mass until it disappeared after a year. It should be noted that Mother Teresa is not very popular among Calcutta's intellectuals. But it is also possible to spend money on a good cause, and so at least the husband's opinion changed in time for the beatification. It was Mother Teresa's miraculous healing that helped my wife. Now, with the help of the nuns, my children and I receive an education, and I could afford to buy a small piece of land. Everything has changed for the better. With a little PR training, Selku Murmu will also learn that he doesn't necessarily have to tell reporters this part. In the case of Mother Teresa, a systematic distortion of reality with an almost complete lack of critical analysis must be diagnosed if one examines her life's work without prejudice. The media history of the Blessed Albanian begins with the British Malcolm Muggeridge. Without him, the world might never have known about Mother Teresa, wrote the Catholic Times on the 12th of October 1997 after her death. Muggeridge, a fanatical conservative who considered secular liberalism the greatest of all destructive powers, was one of the journalists sponsored by the Congress for Cultural Freedom. This was a CIA organization that was to establish a pro-American counterculture to communism in Europe. In addition to a non-communist left, abstract art and postmodern thinking were financially supported as socially irrelevant expressions of the liberal left. For the fundamentalist Muggeridge, however, Mother Teresa was the figure he needed to spread his ideology worldwide. He found support for it above all in the USA. As early as 1971, Muggeridge predicted that Mother Teresa would win the Nobel Prize, just as her imminent canonization was also predicted long before her death. Increasingly, Teresa developed from a nun to a media figure, traveling around the world for various international events, and also as a deputy of the Pope presentable in liberal circles. She asked every politician she met to intervene against abortion, the pill, and condoms. After 2 unsuccessful attempts, she was awarded the Nobel Prize in 1979 as the result of a well-funded campaign. But what is the dark truth about Mother Teresa? May she also have had different political views than the politically correct mainstream? Was she not basically a kind-hearted and honest helper of the poor? Chatterjee documents that Teresa systematically lied in the media about the nature and extent of her work, while in reality her staff encouraged rather than fought death and ignored calls for help even when they came close. In any case, Teresa's order plays practically no role in crises on the subcontinent. In Chapter 11, Chatterjee compares the missionaries of charity with the Ramakrishna mission according to various criteria. For instance, in the response to crises and disasters, he lists 16 events of the past years, in all of which Ramakrishna provided aid, and in none of which Teresa's order was involved. The living saint has often been in her second adopted country, Rome in the United States, or on an international anti-abortion tour during major disasters. Even her spiritual advisor, Edward Le Joly, author of one of the countless hagiographies, note Figu. Hagiography equals sign research and description of the life of saints about Teresa, noticed already in 1986 in a conversation with a sister that Teresa was constantly absent. Several attempts by Princess Diana to meet Teresa in Calcutta failed because she was never there, so the meetings were eventually held in Rome and New York. While she constantly moaned about how terrible it was to be away from the suffering people of Calcutta, she must have secretly hated the city, where contraceptives and abortion are readily available. She could never have spoken publicly about the suffering of unborn life without at least being lynched verbally. As Chatterjee notes, she came closer to a real lynching in December 1984, when she only had to say, "Forgive, forgive." In the Bhopal industrial disaster in which so many human beings died, as in the WTC attacks, forgive, forgive. Neither she nor her order played a significant role in caring for the victims, except, of course, in the Western media, which uncritically reproduced all press releases. Anyone who now thinks that Anjeze Gongshe Bojashu is a controversial saint does not know the history of the Catholic Church. But one need not only look at recent canonizations and beatifications, such as that of Jose Maria Escriva, founder of the ultra-Orthodox pressure group Opus Dei, or the blessing of Archbishop Stepanak of Zagreb, who supported the Croatian Ustaša fascists in the murder of 350,000 Serbs. Otto von Corvin wrote in the Pfaffenspiegel in 1845, highly recommended to browse through it, in book form or on the internet, about the dear good saints, whose main achievement, according to Corvin, was the suppression of their own lust, with the help of various forms of self-mortification, up to and including castration. In addition, the first saints were mainly concerned with eradicating the hated paganism. St. Nicholas of Myra, today known for his Coca-Cola outfit, destroyed numerous pagan temples of the pagan goddess Diana. His holiday is December 6th, coincidentally Diana's birthday. St. Martin also destroyed many temples, and incidentally, he also cut down religiously venerated trees. And St. Cyril of Alexandria ordered or condoned the brutal murder of the pagan scholars Hypatia in 415. So famous was Hypatia that even Christian scholars like Socrates Scholasticus praised her in the highest tones as a beautiful, wise, virtuous woman. Eric Moeller.
On the 10th of August, 1999, in the 257th Contact Report, Billy and Tar had a brief discussion on this subject. Here is the excerpt.
Then something else. Perhaps you are aware that the so-called Mother Teresa is to be canonized in a fast-track trial next year. But you yourself told me about this woman that she is a criminal who commits or has committed serious crimes under the guise of faith and religion, respectively, because she has died in the meantime. As I know from you and from various earthly sources, she was a child robber who stole the children of many Indian mothers and sold them to childless foreigners for expensive money. She told the mothers from whom she stole the children, in collaboration with other sisters of her order, that the children entrusted to her had died, etc. She also raised millions of dollars in donations, which were entrusted to her, to relieve the suffering of those in need and to build hospitals and nursing homes, etc. But all the many dollars that you gave me not so long ago, 3.5 billion, 3,500 million, which she begged and swindled from heads of state and business leaders, etc., were never used for the purposes that Mother Teresa said they would be used for. Only a few dollars were actually spent for the purposes mentioned, while the great rest, more than 1.7 billion, 1,700 million, if I remember your information correctly, was carried to Rome by the swindler to fill the papal coffers. Can this be left in the open and also made public, or should I rather keep quiet about it?
What I have told you about this deceitful little woman corresponds to the events and facts, so the explanations may also be mentioned openly. So far, then, the voices that pillory Mother Teresa and her actions, her attitude, her greed, and her criminality. Anjeze Gongshe Bojasyu, alias Mother Teresa, had not grown up in poverty. She came from a bourgeois home. Her father was the head of a trading company. The family also made a good living after his early death. She and her two siblings enjoyed an excellent school education. Anjeze Gongshe Bojasyu developed into an extremely cunning, greedy, egotistical, cold-hearted, sadistic, deceitful, mendacious, and extremely strong-willed woman who craved praise and recognition and who knew how to throw sand into the eyes of the whole world to an extent that is hard to beat. How was it possible for her to achieve so much fame, to achieve so much, to enjoy the freedom of fools, and to make billions? Her secret was the camouflage of Christianity and her supposed charity. She took advantage of humanity's religious delusion, which would once again prove that delusion affects the mind and reason. It was itself devoid of all faith, as was and is the case with many church men and women, including several popes, as we know from well-informed sources. God, gods, saints, and everything else that falls into this category is an invention of the human beings, and the delusional belief in God is a disease of the human brain, comparable to schizophrenia. It is inherited regularly from the human beings to their descendants, and the education that goes with it ensures that this disease can continue to thrive and grow. Depending on how pronounced the predisposition is and how strongly it is promoted in current life, the more it can degenerate into pathological delusion, fanaticism, and sectarianism, or simply enslave and burden the human beings and keep them in the belief that this is normal. The main religions, and therefore also the national churches, are not excluded from this, because they too have strong sectarian traits, and they are the real origin of the rampant sectarianism. So Boyle follows Boyle. The religions, sects, and false philosophies with all their fanatics, power-hungry fanatics and pious people have caused the natural laws and recommendations of creation with their high ethics and morals to be lost more and more, and to be diluted and falsified by heresy and human excesses. All the good virtues of human nature, such as compassion, honesty, charity, responsibility, discipline, compassionate warmth, righteousness, justice, and honor, etc., have absolutely nothing to do with a religious belief, and it also does not promote these virtues in any way. Basically, all these high values are already there when the spirit form and the block of consciousness enter the new, tiny human fruit on the 21st day after conception. These values do not only arise in the course of life, but are fundamentally present in the consciousness block of the human beings. But they must be sought, grasped, developed, and nurtured by the human being in his life. A religious faith is not necessary for this, but only an appropriate, good and righteous education and self-education, because such a faith, even if it has been passed on regularly, develops only later through a wrong and religious sectarian error education, as well as through similar environmental influences. All the imaginary gods of all religions and sects, together with their gurus, etc., demand unconditional obedience, worship, adoration, and blind faith from their believers. Otherwise draconian punishments, hell and purgatory or bad subsequent incarnations, etc., are waiting for them. And in doing so, the same malicious gods are supposed to be gods of love, compassion, justice, peace, comprehensive freedom and harmony, and also demand leniency. Love, justice, and compassion, etc., from their believers, the so-called main religions, as well as their almost innumerable sects or their representatives, interpret the self-invented divine recommendations as they please, and they have from time immemorial and up to the present day spread the most totalitarian and mind-enslaving heresies, which could and still can only be invented by religiously sectarian, insane human brains. Above all, the Christian churches, which believe themselves to be beyond all doubt and claim absolute infallibility and truth for themselves, drag a bloody trail of wars, torture, murder, manslaughter, crimes of all atrocities and the Inquisition behind them, and all the abuses in church institutions that have been uncovered in recent times show that little or nothing has changed since time immemorial, and that many church men and women are still capable of all degenerated evil. On the other hand, spiritual teaching teaches that creation universal consciousness, as the primordial energy and power of all things in existence, never and never interferes with any aspect of the existence and life of the human beings, the fauna and flora, and also not with world events. Basically, it only lets its laws and recommendations work in the form of causality. This also refers to the sufferings of which the pious, like a Mother Teresa, claim to be there to bring the human beings closer to God. In truth, however, suffering is also based on the creational natural law of causality. When suffering arises in the human beings, it arises out of current circumstances, including nature, which is or was driven to degeneration. Everything has its logical natural course, its completely natural origin, which is determined by the creational natural causal laws and recommendations. If the human beings do not fit into these, then they themselves provoke suffering of some and possibly many different kinds. This fact makes it understandable that the human being is responsible in every respect for all his suffering and discomfort, etc. himself, except when he is struck with suffering and harm by other human beings or otherwise by causes not specifically produced. At birth, the human beings have a completely new consciousness and a new personality in absolute purity, without karma or the like from a previous life as a result of any offense. One more word about overpopulation. Because the fact that it continues to grow into boundlessness and brings unspeakable suffering to the human beings, also the self-proclaimed missionary of charity, has contributed a great deal to this. She has been touring the whole history of the world free of charge, of course, and commanded the human beings to multiply, freely according to the will of the Pope in Rome and according to the absurd demand of an imaginary God in the Bible, be fruitful and multiply. Book of Genesis 1.28. She proclaimed that prevention of the devil and abortion should be condemned in the strongest possible terms in every case, really in every case, even if the fruit was produced by rape. Instead of allowing those entrusted to her to die or recover in a dignified manner and to build a reasonable and useful infrastructure, she made her mark with her erroneous views across the planet. Indeed, all this shows how shamelessly this woman, greedy for bare power, camouflaged under a white robe with 3 blue stripes, was able to take advantage of the masses' delusion of faith. What Brigitte has written is of good quality in every respect and corresponds to reality in all respects. The article is very suitable for publication in a bulletin. Since the bulletin is distributed worldwide on the internet and is read by many Earth humans, it is possible to create a great enlightenment regarding the real facts about this reprehensible woman, Mother Teresa.
That's what Bridget and I think too. We also think that this article belongs in the contact reports, which is why I have put it at your disposal so that we can talk about it. Which makes me wonder about this matter. Why did this she-devil woman have her hair cut off the hair of those she had already tormented and doomed to die?
She made a lot of money with it in a criminal way because she sold it with a big profit, especially in Europe and in the USA, to manufacturers of spare hair parts.
You mean wigs and toupees?
That is the meaning of my statement.
And what you said at the 257th official contact conversation in 1999 about the sums of money she swindled and what she raked in the Pope's ass in Rome is of correctness, and not a spelling mistake in the conversation report?
The information is undoubtedly correct. All in all, this degenerate personality obtained $3.5 billion, $3.5 billion US dollars from rich and poor people all over the world. $1.7 billion, $1.7 billion, of which she passed on to the popes in the Vatican in Rome. She began her real career on the 10th of September 1937 in Darjeeling in India, where she spent years trying to realize her plans, which she had made very early on by every means possible. The real start came in 1949, when she opened her first school in a slum in Calcutta and managed to sneak in with Pope Pius XII, who worked from 1939 to 1958 and supported the false missionary with all possible means. As Superior General, she also gave her permission to form a community of missionaries of charity, which she presided over until the end of her life.
His successor, then, John III, also fell in love with the woman in every way and also supported her. And when he died in 1963, the same legacy passed to Pope Paul VI and continued until 1978. Then, however, came Pope John Paul I, who distanced himself from the woman's reprehensibilities as well as from all sorts of machinations and intrigues in the Vatican, but which cost him his life because he was murdered. As you know, he only held office for 33 days, after which he was found dead on the 29th of September, 1978. Pope John Paul II was immediately elected in his place, continuing the legacy of the other previous popes regarding the machinations and the connection with Angèle Gonché Bojaxiu, as the correct name of this reprehensible woman really was. It was also this pope who promised her in an audience that he would beatify her. And it is to be explained in addition that she had already begun to creep in with large donations of money during the time of Pope Pius XIV, which has been preserved until close to her death. She and her sisters pledged never to work for money or for the wealthy. But this pledge was a mockery, because in reality they were only concerned with their own profit and welfare in the slums, especially the superior general who ridiculously called herself Mother Teresa. Infants and children who were abandoned or taken away from their mothers were sold all over the world for horrendous sums of money. The sick, hungry, and dying were miserably maltreated and exposed to great pain, even to the point of dying and dying in misery. In 1952, the Christian hypocrite and degenerate opened the house Nirmal Hriday, which means something like pure heart. In truth, it was a house for the sick and dying, in which thousands of helpless and suffering human beings vegetated under inhuman conditions and finally died in evil misery.
Thanks. I will add your explanation to the bulletin article. One more question about the Earth's moon. You told me during the 1975 Great Journey that it moves a good 4 centimeters away from the Earth every year. Since then, we have made repeated remarks about it in conversations, and also this year in our talks. In 1975, however, you gave a more precise indication of how far the moon moves away from the Earth each year. You also said that it would take billions of years before it was finally moving away from the Earth. Now that I have been asked a question about the exact distance the satellite moves away from Earth every year, but I no longer know the exact centimeter and millimeter you gave me in 1975, I would like to ask you again. Perhaps you can tell me the exact measurements of today, because maybe it has changed a lot in the meantime?
The exact measure of the present time is still 3 centimeters and 8 millimeters per year. But now, dear friend, I would like to inquire how far Piero's work with the photo book has progressed.
I knew that, just that you would ask about it, which is why I asked Piero about it. He said that things are progressing and that he's on holiday this month and will then do the big work for the book.
That is gratifying. Give him my thanks for his efforts.
But while we are on the photo book, then I would have a further question concerning what you have said on the 7th of July at the 542nd official talk regarding electronic books. You wanted yet to give a further explanation after the end of the official talk, but unfortunately that was lost in our subsequent conversation.
Yes, I remember. To the explanation I wanted to add that the reading of electronic books for the consciousness activity and the physical brain is also extremely harmful. Namely, if by the reading of electronic data only this is included, however not processed in good measure through intellect, rationality, and logic, then slowly but surely there occurs a consciousness poverty and consciousness deterioration. There also appears, however, a gradual deterioration of the brain, in which case a process of brain degradation occurs as well as an increasing body weight and uncontrollable aggressiveness and a gradual loss of intellect. Likewise, all of these negative phenomena forms also apply to all other electronic media of any kind. When the necessary consciousness work is transferred to this, and there is no more determining self, controlling, logical, intellectual, and rational consciousness activity. If it is consumed only through digital media and thus the consciousness-based work is neglected, then it leads to evil consequences, through which is occurring a general deterioration of the ratio, the memory, as well as the psyche and the body. Also arises a lack of ideas, a lack of motivation and lack of interest with regards to a general physical fitness and knowledge-based interests, as well as regarding a good and upright mode of life, etc.
Does that generally apply for the electronic entertainment and information? Thus also with regards to the internet, Facebook, iPad, computer games, etc., and everything that exists in this regard and in the still-to-come future.
That is indeed the case.
Then one can indeed say that the human being of Earth through the digital media slowly but surely falls prey to stupefaction, is increasingly incapable of life in his or her brain, through a gradual shrinking smaller, is incapable of action, and the human being is ever dumber and stupider.
The disastrous thing can also be named in this form. It is not only electronic books that bring about the human consciousness and ratio-based damage, but regarding this, it is all digital information media, as well as all so-called game consoles are to be named. Through the diversity of digital media of all kinds, especially children and adolescents, as well as adults dependent on the mentioned media, are at risk. Step by step, the life capability, the life endurance capability, the self-value, the personal choice capability, the thought and feeling world, as well as the power of self-initiative wither through the whole thing. Everything in this regard will be strongly affected to such an extent that even the feeling for others, the sense of law and order and for fairness and righteousness shall lapse into a bad form. Thus emerges anarchy, unconcernedness, wantonness, contempt for life, loss of knowledge, loss of wisdom and lovelessness and ausartend aggression, even down to the conscienceless, reckless, and ausartend harming of the fellow human beings. Tapao. Therefrom further arises also factors of boundless irresponsibility and the endangerment or destruction of his or her own life or those of other human beings.
A real vicious circle, which however is not recognized and will not be taken into account. Therefore, it is also not astonishing that from the digital media, more and more people fall ill in their consciousness, in their psyche, the body, and in many forms even in disturbed behaviors, and that the human beings become always more obnoxious and aggressive, unrighteous, hostile and slanderous, etc. towards each other. A build-up of good interpersonal relationships does not have a chance. And when I think that also the unbearable disharmony regarding the music as well still plays an important role, simply because of the disharmonious ruckus and racket of the abused musical instruments and in relation to the yelling, shrieking and howling of the so-called singers, then I see only an iota in it which is necessary in order to complete the disaster. Also, the whole sectarianism of the main religions and their sects still contribute immensely to this end, so that everything is ever worse. The religious sectarian deluded belief is indeed, since time immemorial, destructively puttering among the earthly humankind, but the majority, the religious and sectarian believing, are so dumb and dependent that the reality and its truth cannot be recognized. Thus, the reality and its truth cannot emerge for the humankind, and consequently cannot be understood. There is no peaceful righteousness, and equitably, neither for the individual human being, nor for the whole of humankind, through a religious sectarian believing, and through prayer. Consequently, the human being of Earth does not turn to the creational natural laws and recommendations, and therefore also not to the love, the feelings for others, and the peace, the freedom and harmony. Also, a religious and sectarian belief and an equally directed prayer does not bring about true fairness, as well as bring about no more wars and no more carrying out of terrorist acts. A belief in prayer in religious and sectarian form, however, also does not contribute to it that the human beings of Earth liberate themselves of their hatred, of their falseness, of their pathological craving for revenge and retaliation, as well as their lovelessness, and neither of their avarice, selfishness, and jealousy, not of their aggression, lies, cheating, calumnies, and of the all-around wrong behaviors, as unfortunately is so since time immemorial. For the human being to transform for the better and to powerfully put all good values into action does not require religious and sectarian belief and prayer, but the courage for reality and its truth, and the courage for the initiative, to turn him or herself towards the creational natural laws and recommendations, and to live and act in accordance with these. But this requires a healthy motivation and a good will of each individual, which is lacking for the majority of terrestrial humanity. Indeed, primarily through the religious sectarian deluded belief and the therefore accompanying false faiths. Should the whole thing change for the better and the good, then the reality and its truth must be recognized, courage be taken, and everything necessary and important for a change be put into action. This also means that despots, dictators, tyrants, and sect bigwigs of all kinds, etc., be no longer tolerated, but are chased away or no longer even allowed to take the rudder. Thus it is also necessary that the peoples free themselves from these types of elements. Therefore, through those agitators, no oppression, no terror, no war, and no more deceptions take place, and no more false teachings are spread, as no further evil can be further caused, even in terms of the spreading of the religious and sectarian irrational teachings. Only the creational natural laws and recommendations alone should be observed and fulfilled, in which case, what also must be understood is that the creation is not a godhead, but a pure spirit energy that finds its manifestation in its natural physical laws and recommendations, and is existent only in this spirit energetical wise.
Pure spiritual teaching, and that is a good thing. There is nothing more to say.
I did not expect either. One question that has been on my mind for a long time. There was a case of infanticide a long time ago, where the mother threw her infant into a river, where it was torn away by the water, and of course drowned. I only read about the incident in the newspaper, after which a relative of the mother also told me about it and asked me for advice on how to behave towards the mother as a person indirectly involved, as a close relative, etc. I was told that the mother was the wife of a brother, and that the marriage relationship between the two was very bad, because the brother had harassed his wife to the letter. The wife, who gave birth to 3 boys during the course of the marriage, had fallen into a complete mental collapse and had become a helpless bundle of misery, which ultimately drove her crazy and made her lose her nerves and, so to speak, her mind, and in this situation she let her youngest son drown in the river. The little boy was not yet 6 months old. Now that I also experienced many things in the same way in my marriage on the part of my ex-wife, and lived through real hell and real catastrophes with her for more than 30 years before the divorce put an end to everything, I was able to find understanding for this mother after all that I was told. So I advised my acquaintance to contact her and give her advice, and I also gave her advice. This contact also came about when the mother was not in prison but in a women's shelter and underwent psychiatric treatment. This resulted in a good interpersonal relationship between the 2 sisters-in-law, which had not been possible before. At the court hearing that followed, the mother was acquitted, but the 2 older boys were given to the father to look after and bring up, after which they were divorced, and shortly afterwards he got himself a new partner. He did not show any remorse, and so his new partner will probably not fare well with him either.
You are talking about...
Exactly. I often think about the whole thing, so I sometimes ask my friend how her sister-in-law is doing. I also worry about the reasons behind the deed because it is hard for a normal human being who has not experienced much suffering, misery, or hell to understand why a mother kills her child. From a purely psychological point of view, I believe that the act of desperation is not only based on a completely demolished psyche, but also on self-pity, despondency, and the fact that somehow vengeful impulses must have played a part against the terrorist husband, so that the death of the baby would punish him, and he too should suffer. Could you perhaps say something about this, just whether my assumption is correct or not? There are always such cases of infanticide, both by mothers and fathers. In the same or a similar context, The same thing probably happens with suicides, because many of them kill themselves because they want to harm and harm others in their crazy and pathologically stupid and illogical thinking, because they have also done harm to them. Or they have fallen into the delusion that such culprits would change their minds for the better and change for the good, which is also true for mothers and fathers who kill their children as a result of such crazy thoughts and feelings.
Your assumption is not just such an assumption, but everything is circumstantially a fact of the corresponding reality. With the mother, respectively, the sister-in-law of there must have been a complete hopelessness which led to despair. The state of despair inevitably brings with it despondency and self-pity, etc., as well as hopelessness and degenerating thoughts and feelings, which on the one hand lead to suicide or suicide respectively, but also, illogically, to feelings of revenge against the person who is the cause of the whole evil. With such thoughts and feelings of revenge occurring on such a scale, the illogical false hope that the guilty person who is responsible for the psychic conscious and usually also physical breakdown of the desperate person is himself to suffer great suffering when a child or other human beings loved by him is killed is always illogical. And what you further explain in relation to suicides, etc., also corresponds to the circumstances which have been appearing again and again since time immemorial.
Thanks for your confirmation. See here, I have received this question and I will answer it openly in a bulletin. If you have anything to say about it, please do.
Question: what do you think of the so-called European Rescue Scheme, ESM? Can we use it to save the financially weak countries Greece, Portugal, Italy, etc.? Who can tell us where all the billions we pump into this bottomless pit will really end up? This is all so complicated to understand that I would really like someone to explain it to me. You and Ta do not talk about such things anymore, but could you do it for once? Hans Bayer, Germany.
I do not want to talk about that, because it is no longer in our interest to deal with such Earth humans nonsense. So I guess it is up to you to write a corresponding answer for a bulletin.
I actually thought you might say that. Then I will model such an answer and tell you how I see the whole thing. But maybe you can say something about it?
A short assessment, so to speak?
I mean, yes.
That's what I want to do.
Good. Then I will make an effort to express my thoughts on the matter of the question and to translate them into understandable words, which, however, will not be pleasant for certain people. So then...
Answer. I cannot give you a clear answer to your question whether the whole world is going bankrupt, except that it is extremely unpleasant what is happening in all countries of the earth on the financial markets, in governments, and in the economy. But when I look at the whole thing, it seems that everything is going downhill, is getting worse, and is heading for global financial and economic collapse if something does not change for the better soon. If the people continue to have such rivets and zeros in their governments, who have no shred of intelligence and reason in financial management and governance, then soon there is nothing to be saved. If all those in positions of responsibility in politics and economics continue to behave as ignorant primitive savages in matters of finance, politics and economics as they have done for many decades, then sooner or later there must be a crash. If reason and logic are not at last called for, and if the loud-mouthed bank bosses, bank managers and economic bosses, as well as the state finance ministers and other authoritative rulers, are not replaced by authoritative specialists who do not work for their own greed for power, their own image, and not only for their own good, and also not by horrendous salaries in their own sacks, but for the state and thus for the people, then everything can still end very badly and lead to a violent collapse of a worldwide form. But as long as all these experts are at the helm in all decisive positions in governments, banks and in the economy who only have their own reputation, their greed for power and their wealth and personality in mind, nothing better and above all, nothing good can come out of it. So it is also questionable whether the so-called European Rescue Scheme, ESM, can change things for the better and save the big debtor countries Greece, Italy, Spain, and Portugal, to which others will soon be added. And the probably last general idiocy in debt-making is that debt should be made in unlimited form, far beyond the national gold reserves, as it already happened in the USA in the 1970s, when the morbidly stupid 37th U.S. President Richard Milhous Nixon arranged that the U.S. dollar could no longer be tied to the national gold reserves from then on, and that debt could therefore be made in unlimited amounts. The conclusion of this abysmal idiocy has since led to a mountain of debt for the United States of America amounting to over $15 trillion. The same incredible idiocy is now also being considered for the European Union and its member states respectively. This is intended to solve the problem of countries' debt, which of course goes far beyond any idiocy ever created financially and must ultimately lead to unprecedented inflation. But what else can the people expect from their rulers if they have no idea whatsoever about financial management and drive the states into unlimited debt? And when you consider that the biggest debtors in the EU are the German government and have driven their own country into an enormous mountain of debt, in the very place where the loudest mouths are, then it can make the thoughtful citizens' hats fall off in anger and despair. The irresponsible nonsense of the introduction of the euro alone should have been prevented by the German government and by the EU heads in Brussels. But this was not done because the government brains, at least among those named, were full of straw or sawdust or other worthless stuff, so the whole thing could not be prevented. So it was also impossible for these confounded brain blowers to realize that first all EU states should have been debt-free and that it should have been compulsory for each state to have a respectable financial cushion to call its own. But this was not the case, because where there is only an empty brain or a brain filled with straw or sawdust, neither intelligence nor reason or logic can find any grounds. It also never occurred to those in charge that it would have taken at least another 20-30 years to introduce the euro, and that this would have been the case only if all EU countries had been instructed in this way to become first and foremost debt-free and to stabilize public finances. But this was not the case, and as in the past, the debt-making process also continues today because there are no financiers at the helm, only financially uninformed idiots. But once a person comes along who can save and handle the state finances in a correct way, then those idiots will come along who will once again spend the money they have saved on nonsensical things in order to realize their crazy and feeble-minded ideas and wishes, regardless of losses and a possible collapse of the state. And the other bad thing is that the population of every state where such action is taken takes the whole thing as a model and acts in the same way. As a result, it is not only the states that are hopelessly in debt and will never be able to reduce their mountain of debt again, but also the population, the entire economy, and the banks that act in the same way. In the end, all this mismanagement is such that in every country the population has to pay for the debts incurred by the governments, the economy, and the banks. Unfortunately, there is an all-round lack of intelligence, understanding, reason and logic, both in every government, in the banks, and in the economy, and also among the population of every country, and where these values are lacking, as we know, hops and malt are lost.
So that is what I see and what I understand. What is your opinion?
If I am to comment on this, then I have to say that your statements correspond to a large extent to the way I also see the whole thing. So it is equally my meaning which you present. There is probably nothing more to be said about it, because everything corresponds to correctness and reality, and thus to the truth. Your words, however, will not bring joy to many, but will bring much anger and enmity against you.
What I do not care about the truth is not gladly heard or read, as you also know. But what is there to say about fructose, which is so much praised for being so good for losing weight? Because of my body weight, it is as you predicted, that it is not losing any more weight, but always hovering around 80 kilograms, even though I eat food on the back burner. Should I perhaps make sure that I only eat sweet foods that contain fructose instead of white granulated sugar? Would this possibly reduce my weight even more?
You are disinformed. Fructose is not suitable for losing body weight because it causes an even faster and more extensive weight gain than refined white sugar. The assertion that fructose has less influence on an increase in body weight is misleading.
Aha, this is unpleasant. So a lot of nonsense is being talked about in this relationship. Then another question. Do you know the Robinson story?
The one about Daniel Defoe? If you mean this one, then I know the book in reality.
That's what it is all about. It is said that the story is fictitious, which I myself also see, but Defoe is said to have taken the story of a sailor as the basis for his book. The sailor is said to have lived alone on a remote island for years after a shipwreck.
That's right. This sailor, his name was Alexander Selkirk, did indeed exist, but the story as Robinson Crusoe was freely invented by Daniel Defoe.
I realize that, as I said before, but what is the truth about the sailor Alexander Selkirk after all? When I looked on the internet, I found various assertions and representations, although it is not clear which data correspond to reality.
Actually, there are different versions from different authors, all of which I know. The real truth, however, can be found on the internet if you look for an author named Diana Suhami, who collected the most effective facts and wrote a book from them. You can also simply enter the search term, "A Creep Becomes World Famous," and you will find a short review with the most important information in a realistic form.
Can I open it right now and look it up?
Of course, because I am in no hurry.
Good. Then I will turn on the computer so it takes a while. Well, then I look for it now and there it is. Aha, well, then I will copy the whole thing and use it here in our conversation, but I want to skim through it a bit.
Field reports for Selkirk's Island. The true story of Robinson Crusoe by Diana Suhami, Giovanni Bandini, Dit Bandini A Creep, becomes world-famous field report by Druniok PB about Selkirk Island. The true story of Robinson Crusoe by Diana Suhami, Giovanni Bandini, Dit Bandini 2004 product review of the author, Pro. The truth is more exciting than the legend. Contra, not applicable. Recommendable. Yes. Complete experience report brief criticism for the impatient.
The story of Alexander Selkirk, who was abandoned on a lonely Pacific island in 1704 and had to fend for himself for more than 4 years until he was rescued, became the template for the story of Robinson Crusoe. Diana Suhami detaches fiction from historical truth, to which she herself, however, restores literary qualities by using Selkirk's story as an opportunity to take a look at the world of the early 18th century. This is done in short, striking chapters and at a remarkable stylistic level. The result is a history book of novel quality. Contents a seafarer's life in the early 18th century. England is at war with Spain, which is also being fought on the world's oceans. Central and South America, as well as the South Seas and the Caribbean, are firmly in Spanish hands. The Catholic king has huge quantities of gold and silver pressed from his colonies. The heavily loaded treasure ships covetously catch the eye of the English. With royal approval, caper ships are equipped to ambush the pot-bellied galleons along the South American coasts. One of these is the Cinque Ports in 1704. It belongs to a group of 2 ships under the command of the adventurer William Dampier. Dampier turns out to be an unfit leader, constantly drunk and choleric. The helmsman Alexander Selkirk, A young Scot is himself a rough, irascible human being who fights hard with Thomas Stradling, the captain of the Cinque Ports, when the ill-prepared caper trip proves to be a disaster. Stradling makes short work of the mutineer. In September 1704, he abandoned Selkirk on a desert island, a procedure not unusual at the time. San Fernando lies more than 600 kilometers off the west coast of Chile in the Pacific. The unforgiving captain leaves his adversary there alone, which is unusually cruel. Selkirk experiences his first time on San Fernando in a state of shock. Without a lot of equipment, he is completely on his own. Soon the life support instinct takes over. The lonely man takes up the challenge of a wild but not generally hostile environment and masters it by gradually adapting to it rather than opposing it. Selkirk survives for 4 years and 4 months on his island. In February 1709, he is discovered and rescued by the sailor Duke. Only in 1711 he returns to England and resumes his life. His written history assures him a certain attention of the public. He remained attached to seafaring. Despite his suffering, he continued to be drawn to distant lands where he sought his fortune. When he died in 1721, it was on another business trip off the African coast. Presentation. At least Selkirk can still experience how his story is transformed into immortal literature. It was used by the writer Daniel Defoe, 1660 to 1731, as a model for his novel Robinson Crusoe, 1719. Whether the author and the model ever met in person is assumed, but is not proven. Selkirk's biography, which understandably focuses on the 4 years and 4 months he lived on his island, is long gone behind Defoe's novel. Diana Suhami is not the first to attempt to reconstruct the truth behind the legend. But the author is more deeply involved than her predecessors in the archives of the seafaring world, reading and analyzing old logbooks, reports, files, etc. In this way, not only the fate of Alexander Selkirk has been resurrected. Suhami sketches a panorama of sea life around 1700, which in turn represents an important aspect of historical everyday life with its laws and rules, customs and traditions that seem exotic, even barbaric today. On the other hand, this sunken world is not spread out before us in all the details that have been read. Suhami has her stuff under control and has the self-discipline to work with the facts. She selects, interprets, evaluates, guides her readers tightly through the story. The chronology is a rough one. Time leaps happen. Short chapters highlight aspects that sometimes seem out of context. All in all, they form a complete picture, Selkirk's world. Selkirk's island years are, of course, the centerpiece of the presentation. For a contemporary, there was nothing at all tempting about a life as a dropout directly at the bosom of nature. The wilderness was not called that for nothing. It was considered a frightening place that had to be tamed, cultivated, before it became humane. A mild climate, water, edible plants, and animals enabled Selkirk to survive. Suhami describes the island and its inhabitants, and gives us a vivid picture of this exotic Pacific world. There is no denying Selkirk's loneliness and fears. The human beings are literally abandoned all by themselves and have to live with their foreign environment, but also with themselves. Suhami captures this difficult process in words that certainly leave the framework of a nonfiction book and play into the realm of the novel. Selkirk himself has only partially expressed his inner life during exile or with the pathos of his time, which means that it is probably only fair to assume that he has done so. In any case, Suhami must agree, who sees in Selkirk a rough, villainous, and therefore insensitive and capable of living contemporary who, unlike his spiritual mirror image Robinson Crusoe, certainly does not indulge in highly moral thoughts. He does not have the corresponding intellect, and there is simply no time for it in his struggle for survival. Besides, Robinson is not sexually starving the goats on his island, as Suhami suggests Selkirk is doing. Suhami also reconstructs Selkirk's life after his stay on the island. The return to civilization is also a return to old difficulties. Selkirk has by no means overcome his character flaws. He quickly transforms back into a rough, ruthless journeyman who forgets everything he might have learned on his island. His end is as typical of the times as it is banal. There is no happy ending. The last chapter describes the author's visit to the island of San Fernando, renamed Robinson Island for tourist reasons. There is not much more to see of Selkirk Island, which has changed a lot in 3 centuries. Never did many human beings settle on the island, but they have truly cultivated it in a human way, HRS, exploiting and destroying its unique flora and fauna. It is only today that Selkirk's Island, which had become a truly inhospitable place, is being protected, giving the author the opportunity for all sorts of clever philosophical digressions about the mysterious nature of human nature. Book Selkirk's Island. The true story of Robinson Crusoe authors Diana Suhami, Giovanni Bandini, Ditte Bandini Medium. Paperback publication date 2004. Publisher Goldman.
This is really interesting and is out of the usual framework of all the stories about Robinson Crusoe. Although the whole thing is only a short outline, it says a lot. And so this is the most truthful thing about all things?
Yes.
At the 542nd official contact conversation, I asked you what you mean by higher life, to which you answered that it means all life forms that have a conscious consciousness or an instinct consciousness, and therefore also a psyche life as well as a perception of pain. Now, I have another question about this, which is whether lower life forms, which do not have an instinct consciousness like higher life forms, do not have a psyche. Actually, I cannot imagine that, because I think that insects and the like should also have some form of psyche.
What you think about this is correct, because even low life forms of various kinds which do not have an instinct consciousness but only a pure instinct action also have a form of psyche. This is, however, like instinctive action, only instinct-based.
Does this mean that the instinct-conscious beings without instinct consciousness have an instinct psyche, so to speak? Further, that instead of an instinct consciousness, they only have instinctive action? And that also includes insects and even lower life forms?
That is correct.
And such life forms, can they also be instinctive learners, so they can learn different behaviors, etc.?
That is also correct.
So then insects and all kinds of vermin could also be programmed by scientists for certain behaviors, so to speak, so that they would then act instinctively, perhaps for warlike combat missions, etc., to put the opponents out of action, to damage them or to bring diseases and deadly epidemics upon them. I know that for many years scientific and electro-technical experiments have been carried out with such low life forms, such as cockroaches, for example, and that they can be controlled in various ways, but that they are also capable of learning, of instinctive action, and also have an instinctive psyche. That was not known to me.
What you say is all correct. But now, dear friend, I have 2 more things I want to discuss with you in private. After that, it is time for me to go again.